Ebony came back to herself in fragments. Sound reached her before sight. A low, urgent voice somewhere near her head said, "Brake failure." Another voice, quieter, replied, "If she'd been 2 seconds later." The rest of the sentence didn't land. It didn't need to. Her throat felt dry. Her chest tightened as if something heavy was pressing down on her. She tried to move her hand and felt resistance. Tubes. Tape. A dull ache spread through her arm, her ribs, her head. "Ebony?" someone said quickly. She forced her eyes open. White ceiling. Blurred shapes. A machine beside her bed clicked steadily, patient and unforgiving. To her right, a figure leaned forward so fast the chair scraped the floor. Sterling. His suit jacket was gone. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and wrinkled. His eyes were red. Not moist. Red. Like he hadn't slept. Like he'd been crying for a while. "Oh, thank God," he said, his voice breaking at just the right places. "You're awake. Baby, you scared me." His hand closed around hers. It was warm, firm, familiar. A doctor stood at the foot of the bed, flipping through a chart. "Miss Caldwell, you're very lucky. The impact should have killed you. We don't see survival rates like this often." Ebony swallowed. Her mouth tasted like metal. "What happened?" the doctor answered gently. "Your brakes failed as you exited the garage. Complete mechanical loss." Sterling let out a sharp breath, like the words had hit him all over again. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against the mattress, still holding her hand. "I keep thinking," he said, voice shaking. "If I'd asked you to wait, if I'd driven you—" His shoulders trembled. A nurse stepped in to adjust a line and murmured, "She's lucky to be alive," to no one in particular. Lucky. Alive. Ebony stared at the ceiling while their voices overlapped. Images came back in flashes. The slope of the garage ramp, her foot slamming down. The car not slowing. The wall coming too fast. Her heartbeat quickened. Sterling squeezed her hand tighter, like he was afraid she might disappear again. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She nodded slightly, but something inside her didn't settle. Not fear, not yet. Confusion. Because even through the pain, even through the fog, one detail refused to leave her. When the car didn't stop, when she screamed, when she thought it was over, Sterling hadn't been there. If you believe betrayal always leaves clues, hit like and comment "I see it." Some truths don't reveal themselves immediately, but they always leave marks. Sterling stayed close, too close. Every time a nurse stepped in, he straightened immediately, voice firm, questions ready, playing the role of the devoted husband with precision. He thanked everyone. He nodded at every explanation. He repeated details back like he was memorizing them. Ebony watched from the bed, quiet. When the doctor left, Sterling leaned in again. "They said the brakes completely failed," he said quickly. "No warning. Nothing you could have done." She hadn't asked. His thumb rubbed the back of her hand in a steady rhythm, as if calming himself more than her. "I keep replaying it," he continued. "The timing. The garage. You always leave around the same time. I should have known something was wrong." She turned her head slightly, studying his face. "You always leave around the same time." It wasn't concern that made her chest tighten. It was how easily the words came out, how practiced they sounded. A nurse returned to check her vitals. "Pain level?" she asked. 7, Ebony answered. Sterling cut in before the nurse could respond. "She's tough," he said with a strained smile. "She didn't even cry when they pulled her from the car." Ebony looked at him. She had screamed. The nurse adjusted the 4 and left. Silence settled between them, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with the machines. Sterling cleared his throat. "The police already ruled it mechanical," he said. "Just bad luck." Again, she hadn't asked. Ebony shifted, pain shooting through her ribs. Sterling reacted instantly, standing, hovering, calling her name like she was slipping away again. But his eyes didn't look scared. They looked alert, focused. "Sterling," she said softly. Yes, I'm here. Where were you when it happened? The question landed between them. He didn't hesitate. In traffic. I told you. I had that call, remember? She nodded slowly. She did remember the call. What she didn't remember was him ever sounding rushed that morning, or worried. He sat back down, exhaling hard. I can't lose you, he said. I wouldn't survive that. The words were right. The tone was right. The timing wasn't. Ebony closed her eyes, not because she was tired, but because something inside her needed space to think. Behind her lids, the image returned. The garage slope, the speed, the instant she realized the car wasn't responding, and another detail followed it. When the brakes failed, there had been no warning light. No sound, just silence. Sterling squeezed her hand again. Get some rest, he said gently. I'll be right here when you wake up. She didn't pull away. Whatever had almost killed her wasn't random. And whatever Sterling was feeling, it wasn't fear. The room felt smaller at night. The machines kept their steady rhythm, but everything else softened. Voices lower, footsteps lighter, the hallway dimmed. Ebony lay awake, staring at the corner of the ceiling where the paint cracked just slightly. Sleep wouldn't come. Not with her body aching and her thoughts refusing to slow. Sterling had stepped out to take a call. He said it was work. She hadn't responded. Minutes passed. Then voices drifted in from the hallway, faint at first, then clearer as they stopped just outside her door. Sterling's voice came through first. Controlled. Measured. I told you, it didn't work. Ebony's breath caught. Another voice answered him. Male. Unfamiliar. That wasn't the plan. It was supposed to look clean, Sterling said. Mechanical failure. That's what everyone said. Ebony's fingers curled against the sheet. The payout doesn't move if she's alive, the man said quietly. You know that. There it was, insurance payout. The words hit harder than the crash ever had. Sterling didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice dropped even lower. I need time. She's still in recovery. Footsteps approached. Ebony shut her eyes just as Sterling pushed the door open. His face shifted the moment he saw her, concern sliding neatly back into place. You're awake, he said, walking to her side. Did you need something? She stared at him, at the same mouth that had just spoken those words, at the same hands now resting on the rail of her bed. No, she said. Her voice came out steady. Just listening. He smiled. Relieved. Too relieved. Try to sleep, he said. Tomorrow will be better. He leaned in, brushed a kiss against her forehead, and sat back down, scrolling on his phone as if nothing had happened. Ebony didn't move. Inside her chest, something had broken cleanly in two. The pain wasn't loud. It didn't rush in all at once. It settled slowly, like understanding finally arriving where denial had been. The man beside her wasn't confused. He wasn't scared. He wasn't desperate for answers. He was waiting. Waiting for what hadn't happened yet. Have you ever trusted someone who knew your routines better than you knew yourself? Someone who knew the exact time you left? The exact path you took? The exact moment everything could go wrong? Ebony kept her face still, her breathing even. Because now she knew something else. She hadn't survived by luck. She had survived because something went wrong. And whatever Sterling had planned, it wasn't over. Ebony lay still after that. Sterling's phone glowed softly in his hand as he scrolled, relaxed now, unguarded. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and clean linen. Outside, traffic moved like nothing in the world had shifted. Inside her, everything had. Her mind replayed the words again, slower this time. The payout doesn't move if she's alive. Not confusion, not stress. A calculation. Marriage hadn't been love to him. It had been timing, schedules, predictable routes, a woman who trusted him enough to never question the morning routine. Have you ever trusted someone who knew your life so well they could plan around it? Who knew when you left, which way you turned, and how much time it would take before anyone noticed something was wrong? Ebony understood the real danger now. This wasn't about a broken car. It was about money, and it was about intent. Sterling looked up and caught her eyes open. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. It wasn't a lie. Not anymore, because survival had changed meaning. Living wasn't enough now. She needed answers. Proof. Control. When marriage meets money, truth becomes expensive, and when someone stands to gain from your absence, survival becomes an inconvenience. Sterling reached for her hand again. She let him take it, and in that moment the reality settled fully into place. The man holding her hand had already planned her funeral. The camera pulls forward into her face, steady, unreadable. "How do you prove your husband wanted you dead?" A final, quiet push to the audience. If you've ever ignored a feeling because love told you to stay quiet, comment "I knew." And if you want to see how truth dismantles lies, subscribe now. Ebony closed her eyes, not to rest, but to prepare, because the rest of the story wouldn't be about healing. It would be about watching carefully. Before hospitals, before vows, before money entered the room and changed the meaning of love, Ebony Caldwell belonged to the Third Ward, not as a place she passed through, but as a place that shaped how she walked, how she spoke, how she trusted people. She grew up on streets where everyone knew your name and corrected you if you stepped out of line, where neighbors watched your kids like they were their own, and silence only meant something was wrong. Ebony learned early how to stand steady. On weekday mornings, her mother's voice carried through the house before the sun fully rose. "Up, Ebby. We're not late people." That rule didn't change whether it was school, church, or a gallery opening years later. Ebony didn't rush because she panicked. She moved because she was taught to respect time. Her father used to wait by the door with his keys in his hand, humming softly, never raising his voice. "You don't need to hurry," he'd say. "You just need to be ready." That stayed with her. As a girl, Ebony spent afternoons sitting on the front steps, sketchbook balanced on her knees, drawing what she saw. Old men playing dominoes, kids racing bikes, women calling each other across yards. Life didn't need improvement, it needed attention. When someone scraped a knee, people showed up. When someone lost a job, food appeared. When someone made a mistake, the whole block talked about it, but nobody abandoned them. Ebony learned that love wasn't dramatic. It was consistent. She learned that trust was built in repetition, seeing the same faces, hearing the same truths, watching people keep their word. That's why later she believed routine meant safety. Why familiarity felt like protection. The Third Ward taught her to look people in the eye, to speak plainly, to listen before responding. It also taught her something quieter but more important. You didn't survive alone. When she was 14, a neighbor's car caught fire overnight. Ebony watched from the curb as people gathered, not to stare, but to help. By morning, there was already a plan. Someone knew a mechanic. Someone else had a spare car. Someone else made breakfast. That was normal to her. So when Ebony grew older and moved into downtown spaces, into rooms where people spoke carefully and meant very little, she still carried the same expectations. If someone smiled, she believed it meant something. If someone promised, she assumed they intended to keep it. It wasn't naivety, it was upbringing. By the time Ebony left for college, everyone on her block hugged her like she was going away for good. "Don't forget where you came from," they told her. She never did. Even later, when she curated exhibitions, when her name appeared on programs, when people started calling her talented instead of Ebby, she still came home. Still showed up for Juneteenth cookouts. Still sat with elders and listened. The woman lying in that hospital bed didn't grow up chasing wealth. She grew up believing people were what mattered. And that belief, solid, generous, unguarded, was exactly what made the betrayal ahead so costly. Nora Wallace believed in order. Not the kind that demanded silence, but the kind that kept a house standing when life pushed hard. She spoke with purpose and moved with intention, her voice calm even when she was correcting you. Ebony grew up watching her mother handle classrooms full of children all day, then come home and still have patience left. "Sit up straight," Nora would say at the dinner table. "If you don't respect yourself, nobody else will do it for you." Ebony learned early that love could be firm without being cruel. Marcus Wallace was different. He didn't talk much unless he meant to. He listened first. When he did speak, people leaned in. On weekends, he played jazz at small venues around Houston, never chasing fame, never needing applause. Music was something he gave, not something he used to be seen. One evening, when Ebony was 16, she came home late. Not dangerously late, just later than promised. Nora was waiting. "Where were you?" she asked, arms folded. Ebony hesitated. "With friends," Marcus looked up from the newspaper. "That's not an answer," he said quietly. She sighed. "We lost track of time." Nora didn't raise her voice. Time doesn't get lost. People decide how to use it. That was the lesson. Responsibility wasn't about punishment. It was about choice. Later that night, Marcus knocked on Ebony's door. He sat on the edge of her bed, the way he always did when something mattered. "Your mother worries because she loves hard," he said. "I worry because the world doesn't care how good you are." Ebony nodded, eyes fixed on her hands. "Listen to people," he continued, "but watch them more." That sentence stayed with her long after she grew up. When Ebony brought Sterling home years later, Nora noticed everything. How he spoke, how quickly he answered questions, how often he complimented Ebony in front of others. "He's polished," Nora said afterward, washing dishes. "Just don't confuse polish with substance." Ebony smiled. "He's kind, Mom." Marcus didn't interrupt. He just watched Sterling from the corner of the room, eyes calm, unreadable. Before Sterling left that night, Marcus shook his hand. "Take care of my daughter," he said. Sterling smiled. "Always." Marcus nodded once. "Good." In the hospital now, Nora sat beside Ebony's bed, her hand firm around her daughter's wrist, checking the pulse monitor, like she could will it steady. "You're not leaving me," Nora said. "Not as a request, as a statement." Marcus stood back, arms crossed, watching Sterling speak to the nurse. When Sterling finished and walked away, Marcus leaned in close to Ebony. "You rest," he said softly. "We're here." Ebony believed him. She had been raised by people who stayed, who watched, who remembered what mattered. And whether she realized it yet or not, that foundation was already protecting her. Sundays were non-negotiable. Not because anyone forced Ebony, but because church had always been where life slowed enough to make sense. The same pews, the same greetings, the same rhythm of voices rising together, then settling. When Ebony was younger, Jade used to slide in beside her every Sunday, whispering jokes until Nora shot them both a look. Jade had grown up 3 blocks over, raised by an aunt who believed laughter was medicine and honesty was protection. "You sing like you mean it," Jade would tease Ebony during hymns. Ebony would smile back. "That's because I do." Church wasn't about perfection. People came tired, some came hurting, some came proud, but everyone came known. When Ebony stood to hug someone, it wasn't polite. It was familiar. After service, conversations spilled into the parking lot. News traveled fast there. Who got engaged? Who lost a job? Who needed help? Ebony learned to pay attention without prying, to offer support without asking for credit. Jade stayed close through every stage of Ebony's life. When Ebony left for college, Jade stayed. When Ebony returned, Jade was still there, working long hours, building a life that didn't look flashy but felt solid. "You don't run from where you're planted," Jade once said over coffee. "You grow." That was Jade. Direct, loyal, allergic to nonsense. Years later, when Ebony started working at galleries downtown, Jade was the first to visit. She walked through exhibitions slowly, reading plaques, asking real questions. "You belong here," Jade said once, standing beside Ebony as guests admired her work. "Don't let anybody tell you otherwise." When Ebony introduced Sterling, Jade noticed the shine immediately. The confidence, the charm. "He talks smooth," Jade said afterward, not accusing, just observant. Ebony laughed. "You don't trust anyone." "I trust patterns," Jade replied. "I just haven't seen his yet." In the hospital now. Jade stood at the foot of Ebony's bed, arms crossed, scanning Sterling's movements like she was counting beats. "How long did they say you'll be here?" Jade asked. "A few days," Ebony answered. Jade nodded. "Good. You need rest." Her eyes flicked to Sterling. "We all do." When Sterling stepped out to make another call, Jade leaned closer. "You don't look scared," she said quietly. Ebony met her gaze. "I am," Ebony replied. "Just not the way he thinks." Jade's expression changed, sharpened. "Okay," she said simply. "Then we pay attention." That was how their friendship worked. No panic. No speeches. Just alignment. Ebony had been surrounded her whole life by people who showed up without being asked. That kind of support doesn't shout. And it remembers. Ebony found her voice through work. Not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that stayed with people after they walked away. At the gallery, she didn't rush conversations or oversell pieces. She asked visitors what they felt before telling them what something meant. That approach built trust. Artists respected her because she listened. Collectors respected her because she didn't pretend. At the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Ebony moved through rooms like she belonged there, because she did. She remembered names. She remembered stories behind each piece. When people asked how she knew so much, she shrugged. "I pay attention." After long days, she met Jade at a Montrose cafe where nobody rushed you out. They talked about work, about plans, about nothing at all. Ebony ordered the same drink every time. Routine felt comforting then. Predictable meant safe. Juneteenth was her favorite time of year. Not for the noise, but for the meaning. She helped organize community exhibits tied to the celebration, making sure local artists had space alongside bigger names. She stayed late, adjusting frames, checking lighting, fixing what didn't feel right. "This matters," she'd say. "People deserve to see themselves reflected honestly." That belief followed her into every room. Sterling first saw her fully alive in those spaces. Not dressed up, not performing, just focused. He watched how people gravitated toward her, how she balanced warmth with clarity. "You're different here," he told her once after a long evening event. "This is me," she replied. He smiled. "I like this version." She didn't hear possession in his words then. She heard approval. Ebony believed love should fit into your life, not replace it. She never stopped showing up for work, never stopped returning Jade's calls, never stopped visiting her parents. When Sterling suggested she slow down, she laughed. "This is what I built," she said. "Why would I step back from it?" Now, lying in a hospital bed, those memories came back sharp and steady. The life she'd created didn't revolve around him. It existed before him. It would exist after him. That mattered, because the woman Sterling thought he could erase wasn't fragile. She was rooted, supported, known, and the city that taught her how to stand, how to work, how to love, how to notice, had already given her what she needed next. Awareness. Sterling Caldwell grew up surrounded by certainty. In River Oaks, things worked the way they were supposed to. Gates opened on time. Valets knew your name. Invitations arrived already expecting your yes. Sterling learned early that comfort wasn't something you earned. It was something that waited for you. His childhood home sat back from the street, shielded by hedges trimmed weakly whether anyone noticed or not. Inside, conversations were measured. Voices stayed calm. Problems were handled quietly, often by someone else. Sterling learned that money didn't shout, it moved things. At school, teachers treated him gently. At clubs, rules bent without discussion. When he failed, it was reframed as pressure. When he succeeded, it was expected. No one ever told him no outright. They simply found another way. By the time he reached adulthood, Sterling believed life adjusted to people who knew how to ask. He worked in finance not because he loved it, but because it made sense. Numbers behaved. Markets rewarded confidence. And when they didn't, there was always another angle, another option, another conversation behind closed doors. At dinners in River Oaks, men like Sterling spoke about opportunity as if it were weather. something that arrived regularly for the right people. Sterling listened, nodded, learned the rhythm. He didn't interrupt. He absorbed. Money shaped his thinking quietly. When Ebony first visited his place, she noticed how still everything felt. Clean, orderly, nothing out of place. Sterling watched her take it in, pleased but careful not to show it. "You're comfortable here," she said. "I've always been," he replied, smiling. That was true, and it mattered more than he understood, because comfort had taught Sterling something dangerous without ever naming it, that consequences arrived slowly, if at all. That systems existed to soften impact. That mistakes didn't end lives, they inconvenienced them. He didn't grow up learning how to recover, he grew up learning how to replace. And when Ebony entered his world, grounded, trusting, rooted, Sterling didn't see contrast. He saw access, not to her body, not to her heart, to her life, her routines, her predictability, her faith that people meant what they said. In River Oaks, Sterling had learned how to smile while calculating, how to speak warmth without urgency, how to let others assume sincerity. He was good at it, and at this stage there was nothing about him that felt threatening. Just polished, confident, safe. Not the loud kind, not arguments or raised voices. His parents believed in composure. Appearances mattered. Reputations were protected the same way investments were, carefully and with long-term thinking. Clifford Caldwell expected results. He didn't demand them outright. He assumed them. At the dinner table, he asked about Sterling's work the way a supervisor checks progress, not the way a father asks out of curiosity. "Markets don't reward hesitation," Clifford said once, slicing into his steak. "If you want security, you create it." Sterling nodded. He always did. Vivian Caldwell was different. She believed success should look effortless. She corrected Sterling's posture when he stood, adjusted his cufflinks when they sat together at events. "People decide who you are before you speak," she'd say. "Make sure they decide correctly." Sterling grew up fluent in that language. Presentation. Timing, control. Failure wasn't forbidden, but it was private. Losses were discussed in low voices, behind doors that stayed closed. When Sterling's early investments dipped, Clifford didn't scold him. "You'll fix it," he said. "You always do." That confidence felt like trust, but it came with a condition: results. When Sterling introduced Ebony, his parents were polite, warm even. Vivian complimented Ebony's work. Clifford shook her hand firmly. "She's impressive," Vivian said afterward. "Grounded," Clifford nodded. "Stability is useful." Sterling smiled at the word useful. At family gatherings, success stories circulated like currency. Who closed what deal? Who acquired which property? Ebony listened more than she spoke. Sterling noticed how she absorbed the room, how she didn't compete. "She doesn't play these games," he told his mother once. Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Everyone plays," she replied. "Some people just don't realize which ones." Sterling felt the expectation pressing in from all sides, to move faster, to secure more, to stay ahead. His world didn't punish excess, it rewarded it, as long as it stayed discreet. When losses came later, they didn't feel like warnings. They felt like problems that needed solving, and in a family where solutions were prized above reflection, Sterling learned to look for exits before asking questions. He didn't resent the pressure. He understood it. Success was the standard. Anything less required correction. And correction, Sterling believed, could always be arranged. Sterling relaxed best where nothing felt urgent. Country clubs suited him. The pace was slow, the conversations familiar. Deals floated between rounds of golf, never written down, always implied. Sterling fit easily into those spaces. He knew when to speak, when to laugh, when to let someone else feel important. At the bar after games, stories grew looser. So did judgment. "You play tonight?" one man asked casually, setting his glass down. "Maybe," Sterling replied, smiling. "Depends how the mood feels." It was always framed that way. Mood, timing, never risk. Gambling wasn't introduced to him as danger. It was introduced as sport, a test of instinct, a way to show confidence. Losses were brushed off with jokes. Wins were celebrated quietly, as if too much excitement might offend luck. On weekends, Sterling escaped to Galveston with friends. The coast gave him space to forget numbers and deadlines. Boats, cards, drinks that kept refilling. Conversations that blurred into early mornings. He told Ebony these trips were for networking. That's where relationships happen, he said easily. Away from offices. It wasn't exactly false. It just wasn't complete. At first the losses were small. He covered them easily. No one noticed. No one needed to. He told himself it was temporary. A phase. Something he could stop whenever he wanted. That belief felt reasonable because it had always been true before. At the clubs, no one looked worried. No one talked about consequences. When someone lost badly, it became a story, not a warning. Sterling learned to smooth things over, to say less, to promise more. He started shifting money quietly, convinced it was only until the next win. When Ebony asked once why he seemed distracted after a trip, he laughed. "Just tired," he said. "Too much sun." She believed him, because Sterling never came home frantic, never showed panic. He stayed calm, even when the numbers slipped. Calm had always worked for him. What he didn't recognize yet was the change. The risks weren't staying small, and the lies, casual, effortless, were starting to stack, just enough to require another one. Sterling never thought of himself as dishonest. That mattered to him. He believed there was a difference between lying and managing information, between deception and discretion. In his world, people didn't say everything they knew. They said what kept things moving. With Ebony, that habit came naturally. He brought flowers without being asked, remembered dates, asked about her parents, listened when she spoke about work, nodding at the right moments. Around her friends, he was respectful, attentive, careful not to dominate conversations. People liked him. Jade noticed how he always positioned himself slightly beside Ebony, never in front of her. Nora appreciated his manners. Marcus watched quietly, but found nothing openly wrong. Sterling understood presentation. He understood timing. He understood that trust didn't need perfection. It needed consistency. The cracks were small. He'd promised to be home by a certain hour, then arrived later than expected with an easy explanation. Traffic, a delayed meeting, a conversation that ran long. Nothing dramatic. When Ebony asked once why a transfer notification popped up on their shared statement, he didn't hesitate. "Firm reimbursement," he said. "I mentioned it last week." She searched her memory. Maybe he had. At dinner parties, Sterling sometimes checked his phone more than necessary. He'd step away to take calls, returning calm, smiling, unbothered. Ebony assumed responsibility came with interruptions. That's what trust does. It fills in gaps kindly. Sterling still believed he was in control. Losses hadn't frightened him yet. They irritated him, challenged him, made him feel temporarily off balance. But he had always fixed things before. When Ebony talked about routines, her mornings, her drives, her habits, Sterling listened closely. Not because he planned anything. Not then. Because attention had always been his strength. He knew when she left. He knew which days she stayed late. He knew which habits never changed. It felt intimate. It felt normal. When Ebony asked him once, jokingly, "Why do you notice everything?" he smiled. "Because I care," he said. And at that moment he meant it. Sterling wasn't cruel. He wasn't plotting. Yet, he was simply a man raised to believe that problems existed to be solved, that resources were tools, and that outcomes mattered more than process. That belief hadn't hurt anyone, until it did. The mask didn't slip loudly. It didn't fall away. It stayed in place. Which is why, when pressure finally arrived, Sterling didn't think about stopping. He thought about options. The Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, was unusually busy that Thursday evening. Ebony had just finished leading a gallery walkthrough for a group of sponsors supporting an upcoming exhibit on Black American modernists. She moved with purpose, clipboard in hand, heels clicking softly against polished concrete. Sterling noticed her before she noticed him. He had wandered into the museum looking for something. He wouldn't have been able to name it if asked. His firm had sponsored part of the evening's event, and he had shown up mostly out of obligation. But as soon as he heard her voice drifting from the exhibit hallway, something paused in him. He stood near the back of the group as she explained a piece from a Houston-born painter, her tone alive with meaning, not performance. She didn't paint for galleries, Ebony was saying. She painted because the streets around her didn't match the headlines she kept reading. So she made her own version of the truth. Sterling watched her hands move. Not overly expressive, just certain. Grounded. After the tour ended and guests drifted toward the catered drinks, he approached her casually. "Your voice," he said, "makes a room slow down." Ebony blinked, amused. "That's a new one." He extended his hand. "Sterling. Ebony." He nodded. "Fitting." They stood near a sculpture installation, light catching the edges of her face, jazz playing softly in the background. "You know art?" she asked. "I know when I like something," he said, "and I like the way you talked about it." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not quite the same as knowing it." "Then I'd like to learn." It didn't feel like a line. Maybe because he didn't push. He lingered just long enough to show interest, then stepped back, letting her move on. Later that night, as Ebony helped a fellow curator organize brochures, she looked up and saw him standing by the exit. He gave her a short wave, 2 fingers, no drama, then slipped out. She didn't think about him again until the following Monday, when an email from the museum's events director mentioned a guest who asked specifically for the next public tour she was leading. She smiled and marked the calendar. Their first date wasn't extravagant. It was intentional. Sterling invited Ebony to a dinner cruise on Buffalo Bayou. She almost said no. Water wasn't her thing, but something in the way he asked, direct, calm, no pressure, made her say yes. They boarded just before sunset. The boat was quiet, the city lights just starting to reflect on the water. A jazz trio played somewhere near the back, soft and distant. Sterling didn't try to impress her with stories. He asked questions, real ones. "Do you always sound that sure of what you're saying?" he asked after she explained the cultural symbolism behind a mural project she once led. She smiled. "Only when I believe it matters." He nodded. "You make things matter." Ebony found herself laughing more than expected. Sterling listened. Not the nod and wait kind of listening, he followed up, remembered details. When she talked about her childhood summers in Third Ward, he didn't change the subject. He asked about her father's jazz gigs, about her mother's role at the church. He didn't flinch when she spoke about faith. "I grew up around structure," Sterling said, "but not much soul." Ebony tilted her head. "You sure about that? You move like someone raised around expectations." He chuckled. "That obvious?" "Not to most." They ended the evening standing on the upper deck, the skyline behind them. She thanked him for the night. He said, "Let's not let this be a one-time thing." It wasn't. Over the next few weeks they shared meals, long walks, late-night calls that stretched past midnight. Sterling brought her coffee before gallery openings. She brought him leftover peach cobbler from Sunday dinners. Meeting her parents came sooner than expected. Sterling showed up in a crisp shirt with flowers, 2 bouquets, one for Nora, one for Ebony. Marcus shook his hand, firm but quiet. Nora smiled but watched. Dinner was smooth. Sterling shared a few stories from work, talked about law school, his shift into finance. He complimented Ebony's work without overdoing it. "He listens well," Nora said later, washing dishes with Ebony. "But he talks like someone who wants to be believed." Ebony frowned. "Isn't that normal?" Nora shrugged. "Depends on what he's hiding." Marcus didn't say much, but the next morning he called Ebony early. "Just take your time," he said. "Love moves fast. So does pressure." Ebony appreciated the warning, but didn't feel threatened. Sterling hadn't pushed. He didn't interrupt her world. He moved alongside it. She hadn't seen a reason to be cautious. Not yet. Sterling proposed without spectacle. No crowd, no flash, just timing. They were sitting on Ebony's balcony after a long day, the city humming below them. She had her legs folded beneath her, still talking about an artist she'd just signed for a fall show. Sterling listened, nodding, letting her finish. When she paused, he said, "I don't want to interrupt your life." She looked at him. "Then I don't plan to," he replied. "I want to build inside it." He reached into his jacket slowly, not like someone delivering a surprise, but like someone finishing a sentence. The ring was simple, clean, thoughtful. "I'm not asking you to change," she said. "I'm asking you to choose me." Ebony didn't cry. She laughed, soft, disbelieving, and covered her mouth. "You're serious?" "I've never been clearer." She said yes because it felt steady, because nothing about it felt rushed, because he wasn't selling a future. He was stepping into the one she already had. They told her parents the next Sunday. Nora hugged Sterling a beat longer than expected. "Treat her well," she said. Marcus nodded once. "We're watching." Sterling smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Wedding planning stayed simple. Small guest list, familiar faces. Sterling deferred to Ebony on most choices. When she asked his opinion, he gave it. When she didn't, he didn't push. The paperwork came up casually. They were reviewing finances one evening, sprawled on the couch, laptops open. Ebony mentioned consolidating accounts after the wedding. "Makes sense," Sterling said. "We should also look at insurance. Not because anything's wrong, just planning." She glanced up. "Insurance, life, property." "Boring stuff," he said lightly. "It's just what married people do." They reviewed options together. Employer benefits. Beneficiaries. Nothing dramatic. Sterling asked questions. Ebony answered. They signed what made sense and closed the laptops. No tension. No urgency. Just adults handling responsibilities. Sterling kissed her forehead. "I like building with you." She smiled. "Me too. If you've ever ignored a red flag because you loved someone, comment been there." Sometimes trust feels exactly like safety. Until later. That night, Ebony fell asleep, thinking she had chosen well, because nothing in that moment suggested danger. Everything suggested partnership. Their life together didn't feel cinematic. It felt normal. And that was the part Ebony liked most. There were no dramatic highs, no constant proving, just rhythm, routines, two people sharing space and learning how to breathe in sync. Sterling moved into her loft downtown. He didn't take over. He adjusted. The closet was suddenly shared. The coffee changed brands. She switched out her solo grocery list for a shared digital one. He ironed his shirts while she painted. She sorted invoices while he cooked. On Saturday mornings, she played old soul records. He learned her favorite breakfast spot and never had to ask what she wanted. She noticed how he folded his socks, how he lined his shoes, how he never left dishes in the sink. There was something comforting about that. About the order. They didn't talk about love every day. They just acted like it. One night, during a thunderstorm, the power flickered off. Ebony sat near the window with a candle while Sterling lit another near the kitchen. "You ever scared of lightning?" she asked. "As a kid," he said. "Not anymore." "Why not?" He looked over his shoulder. "I think it's beautiful now." She watched him for a long moment. "You've changed." He walked over, leaned on the wall across from her. "I haven't," he said. "I've just slowed down." They sat in silence as the rain picked up. These were the moments Ebony trusted most. No noise, no movement, just closeness. She showed him pieces of herself in these spaces. Stories she didn't share at work. Failures that still stung. Dreams she hadn't spoken out loud. That made her feel safe. It made her feel chosen. One evening, after a long gallery showing, she came home to find a bouquet on the counter and a note beside it. "You're everything I never knew I needed." She didn't cry. She exhaled. Because love didn't need to be loud to be real. And trust didn't need to be earned every day. Just protected. At least that's what she believed. By the time they reached their wedding date, Ebony had fully let go of the need to question anything. She had watched Sterling show up, quietly, repeatedly, without flaw. That's how trust works. Not overnight, not all at once. It builds, slow, steady, unquestioned. Which is why, when it finally broke, it hurt more than it should have. The late-night calls didn't start as alarming. Sterling had always taken work calls after hours. It was part of the job. At first, Ebony didn't think much of it. His industry thrived on timing. She would be brushing her teeth or folding laundry while he paced the balcony with a hand pressed to his ear, murmuring in short sentences. But something shifted. He stopped answering those calls in front of her. Instead of pacing with the sliding door open, he stepped outside and closed it. Instead of winding down with her after dinner, he excused himself earlier. He still smiled, still kissed her forehead, but the warmth started to feel timed. One Friday night, they were supposed to meet friends for dinner. Ebony was ready before him, which was rare. Sterling rushed through the bedroom, tie in hand, phone pressed between shoulder and ear. "Just meet me there," he said quickly. "It's on the way for you anyway." Ebony frowned. "You're going the same direction." He didn't pause. "I need to stop and grab something. Promise I'll be right behind you." She hesitated, keys in hand. Sterling kissed her cheek and flashed that half-smile that always made her relax. "I'll explain when I get there." She drove alone. He arrived 20 minutes late. No explanation, just a compliment on her dress, a quiet squeeze of her hand, and a refill of her drink. That was becoming his rhythm. Deflect with charm, smooth over with gestures. The bills changed, too. Ebony handled the finances, always had. They'd agreed it was easier that way. But for the first time, transfers started appearing she didn't recognize. Small at first, then larger, she asked once. "Just covering a few things," Sterling said, barely looking up. "I'll walk you through it this weekend." He didn't. The following week, she brought it up again. "You don't trust me?" he asked, setting his coffee down harder than usual. Ebony blinked. "That's not what I said." "You're acting like it is." They didn't argue often. That exchange was short, quiet, but it left something cold between them for the rest of the night. Ebony told herself they were just tired. That work was pulling at him more than usual. But one morning, she saw him delete a message before opening it, and that's when something deeper shifted. She didn't say anything. She just started watching. Sterling stopped playing cautiously. The gambling wasn't out in the open, but the effects were. Ebony noticed a pattern in his behavior after Galveston trips. He came back tighter. Not angry. Not distant. Just elsewhere. He checked emails more often, stared at his phone longer, slept less. One morning, while folding laundry, Ebony opened the drawer where he kept spare documents. Passport, extra checks, old paperwork. The stack of betting slips was folded between old receipts. She didn't confront him. She just looked at the dates. They matched the weekends. He said he was clearing his head. At work, Sterling remained composed, but at home he became unpredictable. Quiet when he used to joke. Focused when he used to rest. He still kissed her goodbye each morning. Still texted her during the day. But the messages were shorter. Fewer emojis. More, running late. Sorry. One evening, Ebony walked past his home office and caught the words beneficiary policy comparison on his screen. The tab disappeared before she could read more. She waited until he left for a quick errand and opened his laptop. What she found weren't criminal secrets, just insurance calculators. Multiple tabs. Some searches bookmarked. A few notes about payouts, timelines, delays. None of it was strange on its own, but together, too much. Ebony didn't ask. Not because she was afraid of the answer, but because something told her he'd already rehearsed one. It was a name that stood out. Sterling was scrolling on his phone one night beside her on the couch. His screen lit up a notification briefly. Just a first name and the word garage. Ebony tilted her head. It was that. Sterling locked his screen. A vendor. Just helping me get some stuff checked at the condo. At this hour? He shrugged. He works late. She didn't press. But the next morning, she texted Jade, "You still know that guy who installs security cameras?" Jade replied instantly, "Yep. Want him to check something?" Ebony nodded to herself. The same afternoon, she made a quiet visit to the condo's garage, stood still in the space where she usually parked, and noticed faint oil marks. Not hers. She walked around. No cameras in the exact spot where her car usually sat. When she returned upstairs, Sterling was on a video call, smiling, laughing, talking fast. He glanced at her, mouthed 2 minutes, and turned back. Ebony stared at him. That night, she lay awake listening to his breathing beside her. The room was dark. The sheets were warm. His hand rested gently near hers. He still looked like the man she married. Still sounded like him. But something was off. Something under the surface. Something she couldn't name yet. But whatever it was, she wasn't imagining it. Her gut had started whispering weeks ago. Now it was shouting. Ebony left the condo late that morning. Sterling had already gone, or so he said. He'd left a note on the kitchen island. Meeting downtown. Back before lunch. "Love you." She grabbed her tote, keys, and phone charger, and rode the elevator down alone. The parking garage was quiet, as usual. The overhead lights flickered slightly, but nothing seemed off. She slid into the driver's seat of her SUV, fastened her belt, and started the engine. That day, she had a list. Drop by the gallery, meet with an artist, grab groceries, call Jade. Normal things, routine, familiar. The ramp curved to the right, tight, narrow, and her tires rolled slowly across the smooth concrete. Halfway down the decline, she pressed the brakes. Nothing. She pressed again, harder. Still nothing. Her foot slammed down. The pedal dropped flat. No resistance. The car didn't slow. It picked up speed. "Come on, no!" she gasped, both hands gripping the wheel. The bottom of the ramp came fast. Too fast? She yanked the steering wheel left, narrowly missing a concrete pillar. The tires screeched. A sharp jolt snapped her sideways as the front fender clipped a support beam. The SUV swerved, skipped the curb, and slammed to a grinding halt just inches from a wall. Her body slammed into the side door. Her head struck the window. The seatbelt snapped tight against her chest. Silence. Then a thin, high ringing in her ears. Her breath came in gasps. Her heart thundered. She sat frozen, hands still on the wheel, her foot trembling uselessly over the brake. The garage was still empty. The lights buzzed above. It took a full minute before she reached for her phone. She never made the call. The garage security team had already seen the commotion on one of the monitors. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Voices echoed. Doors opened. Hands touched her gently. She heard someone say, her brakes went out. She's lucky it happened here and not on the street. They lifted her onto a stretcher. She tried to speak, but her chest ached. Then came the flash of a familiar voice. Sterling, louder than everyone else, pushing past the medics. "Ebony, Ebony, I'm here." She blinked up at him. His face twisted in panic. His hair was disheveled. His voice shook as he grabbed her hand. "What happened?" he demanded. "She's okay," someone said. "Banged up, but responsive. We're taking her in." "I'll follow," Sterling said. "I'm right behind you, baby. I'm here." He squeezed her hand again, then stepped back. Ebony couldn't speak, but her eyes didn't leave his face. Sterling arrived at the hospital minutes after the ambulance. He paced in the waiting room, hand over mouth, eyes red. Nurses whispered. A doctor approached, calm, professional. She has a broken arm, mild concussion, and contusions across her ribs and shoulder. It could have been worse. Sterling exhaled like the floor had been pulled from under him. "Can I see her?" "In a bit. Let her rest." He nodded, sat down, rubbed his eyes, pursed his lips. When the door opened 40 minutes later, he stood like he'd been called for a verdict. Ebony was awake, eyes unfocused. He entered the room slowly. "Baby, you scared the life out of me." She blinked. "They said my brakes." He nodded quickly. gripping her hand. Yes, the brakes failed. I don't know how that even happens. They just stopped working. Sterling sat down beside her, leaned close. That's not supposed to happen. You keep up on maintenance. I should have looked at it. That's on me. Her throat was dry. No warning. Nothing. You don't need to think about it now, he whispered. Just heal. I've got everything handled. She closed her eyes briefly. He kissed her forehead. His hand trembled slightly against hers. God, I thought I lost you. Outside the room, a nurse told another quietly, That man hasn't stopped asking questions. He's terrified. Inside, Ebony shifted in her bed. Her body hurt, her head pounded, but something else pushed through the fog. Not pain, not fear. A question too fast, too exact, and too prepared. That night, Ebony didn't sleep much. The drugs made her drowsy, but her mind stayed active. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the curve of the garage ramp, felt the wheel jerk, heard the empty sound of a brake pedal collapsing beneath her foot, and then she saw Sterling's face, full of urgency, perfectly placed, tearful but not chaotic. He had arrived quickly, too quickly. He had known exactly what had failed. He had said it before the doctor confirmed it. She turned over slowly in bed, trying not to shift her broken arm. When the nurse checked her vitals, Ebony asked casually, Did anyone else come by earlier? Before my husband? No one, the nurse said gently. Security called the ambulance. He showed up just after. Ebony nodded. When Sterling returned the next morning with flowers, fresh clothes, and soft music playing from his phone, she smiled politely. He sat by her side, read updates from her favorite art blogs, told her stories from the gallery. He acted like a man who nearly lost everything. She let him. But inside, her thoughts were gathering speed. The contractor, the garage, the insurance papers, the deleted messages, the calm after the wreck. One by one, the pieces no longer sat comfortably. Ebony knew trauma could make you doubt things, but she also knew herself. And what she felt now wasn't fear. It was certainty. Something had been done, not failed. She was never supposed to leave that garage. And now that she had, the question wasn't if someone did it. It was how soon she could prove who. Ebony returned home 3 days after the crash. Not to the condo, to her parents' house. Sterling helped her pack, made soft suggestions about bringing her back home instead. She declined gently. My mom will sleep better knowing I'm under her roof, she said. He didn't argue. Just kissed her forehead and loaded the bags. At Nora and Marcus's home, things moved slower. Softer. Nora fluffed her pillows more than necessary. Marcus carried her tea before she could ask. Her childhood room looked exactly the same. It made everything else feel foreign by comparison. Jade showed up that first evening. No questions asked. She sat on the floor near Ebony's bed, scrolling through news on her phone. You don't look broken, Jade said. Ebony shifted her gaze. I don't feel broken. Jade glanced up. You thinking what I'm thinking? Jade nodded, leaning back. So the timing saved you? Ebony turned her head slowly. No. The flaw saved me. They didn't need to explain further. Jade understood. From that moment on, Ebony didn't process emotions. She processed facts. She didn't talk about fear. She made lists. Sterling visited the next afternoon. He brought flowers and a book from her shelf at home. Sat beside her, held her hand. You're getting better fast, he said, rubbing her palm gently. Ebony smiled. I always bounce back. You scared me, he whispered. I scared me too. When he left, Jade re-entered the room and shut the door behind her. He's checking in too often, she said. Feels like he's watching for something. Ebony nodded. Let's give him something to watch. That was the moment it shifted. Ebony wasn't recovering anymore. She was preparing. Ebony called in a favor from a former gallery client, someone who once mentioned he restored classic cars on the side. Do you still know any sharp mechanics? She asked. I'm trying to get a second opinion on my car. Quietly, He gave her a name. Ebony passed it to Jade. The SUV had been towed and stored. Sterling said he'd handle the paperwork. Ebony beat him to it. The mechanic inspected the vehicle and sent his report by text, then followed up with a call. "I can tell you now," he said. "This wasn't wear and tear. The brake lines were sliced, clean. Someone did this deliberately." Ebony didn't flinch. "You're sure?" "Not only were they cut, but the tamper was concealed. Whoever did it wanted it to look like failure, not sabotage." She thanked him, saved the report, forwarded it to Jade with one line: "Game on." The next time Sterling visited, he was softer than usual. Brought a new phone charger she hadn't asked for. Massaged her shoulders carefully, avoiding the bruised spots. "I was thinking," he said casually, "when you're back on your feet, we should go somewhere. Just the two of us. Maybe a reset." Ebony nodded. "Sounds good. Anywhere you'd want to go?" "Someplace with mountains," she said. "Flat ground doesn't feel right anymore." He chuckled. "Fair." Later that night, he slipped. They were watching a documentary on unsolved crimes. The subject of insurance came up. Sterling leaned over and said, "It's always the policy. That's how they catch people." Ebony turned to look at him. He blinked. "I mean, in stories like this, it's always that one detail people miss." She held his gaze. Or maybe the detail they didn't think someone would check. He laughed. "Exactly." But he looked away first. She didn't bring it up again. She didn't need to. Ebony knew how to follow money. She had helped artists balance budgets, trace donations, flag bad accounting. She didn't need special tools, just access. Sterling had given her that long ago, trusting she'd never use it against him. But now she did. She logged into the shared financial dashboard while he was out on a quick run. Transactions didn't lie. They didn't stutter. They didn't explain themselves. She saw a series of insurance-related deposits, reimbursements, adjustments, claim history. Small, incremental, but leading somewhere. One payout request was pending, submitted the morning after the crash. She clicked on it, her name listed under insured party. Sterling listed as beneficiary. No hesitation, no delay. He had moved like someone who knew she wouldn't make it. The chair creaked beneath her as she leaned back. Her chest didn't rise in panic. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't fill. She just sat there. Then she whispered aloud, "He didn't panic when I survived. Not when she screamed. Not when she told him the brakes failed. Not when the doctors said she was lucky. Not once, because he had already made peace with her being gone. The only thing he hadn't prepared for was her waking up." She closed the laptop, not to stop, to begin. Ebony didn't report him right away. She collected. She watched. She logged. She documented. When she walked into the Houston Police Department 3 weeks later, she carried a brown folder in her arm. Inside, mechanic report, insurance documents, digital timestamps, and a list of names. The officer at the front desk looked up. "Ma'am? I'd like to speak to someone about a possible attempted murder." That's how it started. Detective Rodriguez met her in a small room with cold air and plain walls. Mid-40s, calm face, sharp eyes. He shook her hand without small talk. "Tell me everything," he said. Ebony laid it out, piece by piece. No emotion, just facts. She described the garage, the brake failure, the early insurance filing, the mechanic's findings, Sterling's odd behavior, his access to her schedule, his presence immediately after the crash, the name of the man he messaged before it happened. Rodriguez didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch, he wrote. He nodded. He circled names. "This man you mentioned, contractor? You said Sterling called him before the crash?" "Several times," Ebony said. "Same day." Rodriguez closed his notebook. "We'll look into it." 3 days later, he called her back. "You were right to come in," he said. Rodriguez had pulled Sterling's call history. The contractor's name came up repeatedly, more than a dozen times in 2 weeks before the crash, more after, always short calls, always at odd hours. We've also requested footage from the garage, Rodriguez added. Your husband told first responders it was out. Turns out it wasn't. It was just conveniently disabled, manually. Ebony didn't say anything. Rodriguez continued. This isn't a random case. It's structured, which means we need to be quiet, methodical, and very, very sure. Ebony understood. Quiet was her specialty now. The next phase moved fast. Rodriguez and his team reached out to the contractor Sterling had been calling. A man named Luther Penn, mid-30s. Handy license, but a record of shady work on the side. When approached, he was confident at first, claimed the calls were unrelated, just tools, questions, quotes. Then Rodriguez showed him the insurance policy, the one listing Sterling Caldwell as sole beneficiary. Submitted hours after the crash. Filed with a backdated timestamp. Let me be clear, Rodriguez said. If you're involved, now's the time to talk. Otherwise, when we move forward, you're part of this. Luther cracked within the hour. He admitted to tampering with the SUV. Not in the moment, but the week prior. I thought he was just trying to scare her, he mumbled. Didn't know she'd actually drive it like that. Rodriguez got it all in writing. Then audio. Then signed. That confession was enough. But they weren't done yet. Rodriguez returned to Ebony with the update. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She just asked, what happens next? It didn't happen in the middle of the night. There was no drama. Just a knock at Sterling's office door mid-morning, while he was halfway through an email. 2 plainclothes detectives stepped in. Mr. Caldwell? Yes? You'll need to come with us. For what? They didn't answer immediately. In the lobby, his co-workers watched without speaking. One woman grabbed her phone. Another turned her face away. The charges were read aloud in the back seat of the car. Attempted murder. Insurance fraud. Tampering with a vehicle to cause bodily harm. Sterling's voice cracked once. I didn't mean. The detective got the call 2 hours later. Rodriguez didn't sound triumphant, just resolved. It's done. She nodded, phone pressed to her ear. What did he say? Nothing useful. Rodriguez paused. But he didn't ask who turned him in. That told them everything. Because Sterling already knew. If you believe the truth always comes out, whether late or loud, hit subscribe now. What's done in darkness never stays there forever. Ebony sat at her parents' kitchen table later that evening. No champagne, no celebration, just peace and silence. Because the trap had closed. But the fight for justice? That was just the beginning. The courtroom was quiet when Ebony walked in. Not silent, but still. The kind of stillness that settles when everyone understands what's at stake. Reporters sat in the back, pens poised. The judge sat motionless, expression unreadable. The jury, 12 in number, watched as she took her seat at the witness stand. Sterling sat at the defense table in a navy suit, hair neat, posture composed. But his face was paler than usual. His eyes followed her closely. Ebony looked past him. The prosecution started slowly. Can you state your name for the record? Ebony Caldwell. And your relationship to the defendant. A beat. He's my husband. Sterling lowered his gaze for the first time. The prosecutor walked her through it. Carefully, respectfully. The garage crash. The brake failure. Her hospital stay. The contractor's involvement. The insurance policy. The early claim. Ebony answered everything without faltering. When asked how she knew something was wrong, she replied plainly, because he didn't look surprised when I lived. That statement held the room. The prosecutor paused, letting it land. Then came the questions about trust. Routine. Shared schedules. Financial access. Yes, Ebony said. He filed a payout request the same day I nearly died. Murmurs moved through the courtroom. The judge tapped his gavel. No reactions, please. The prosecutor finished. Ebony stepped down. Sterling didn't meet her eyes. He didn't flinch. He just folded his hands tightly, like someone trying to stay still in a storm. The prosecution's second blow came from the screen. The judge allowed a brief video from the garage entrance, grainy but clear enough. It showed Sterling walking into the parking level days before the crash, right into the camera's blind spot, right toward Ebony's SUV. Then, the call logs. Rodriguez took the stand and laid it out with precision. Multiple calls placed between Mr. Caldwell and the contractor in question. The last one was the night before the incident. And you verified the brake line was intentionally cut? Yes. The mechanic's report, combined with the contractor's signed confession, confirms that. The defense objected twice, first on relevance, then on phrasing. Both overruled. Then came the insurance documents. Ebony's name on the top. Sterling's signature on the bottom. The policy dated and submitted 10 hours after the crash. By the time the final exhibit was shown, a screenshot of Sterling's calendar where a file claim was written in shorthand. There was no more tension in the room, just clarity. The prosecutor turned to the jury and said, "Intent doesn't always scream. Sometimes it walks quietly, confidently, with a smile." Sterling sat motionless. The verdict came back in less than 3 hours, on all counts. The judge delivered the sentence the following day. Sterling stood as it was read. No sound came from him. No protests, no visible emotion, just silence. Ebony sat near the back, unmoving. Sterling turned briefly toward her when the guards approached, just once, not pleading, not angry, just blank. He was handcuffed, walked out of the courtroom slowly, eyes flicking to the press cameras along the wall. Flash, flash, flash. News anchors recapped the story for the evening bulletin. Former investment banker Sterling Caldwell found guilty today in a murder for insurance plot involving his own wife. Clifford Caldwell declined interviews. Vivian didn't appear in court at all. Their family name, once printed on charity galas and elite donor lists, now scrolled across headlines for all the wrong reasons. One final photo ran in the Houston Tribune the next morning. Ebony standing on the courthouse steps, holding the folder that started everything. No smile, just resolve. When justice moves slowly, people forget it's coming. But when it arrives, it doesn't knock. It opens every door. The gallery was packed, not with critics or collectors, but with neighbors, teachers, artists, survivors. Ebony stood near the entrance, hands behind her back, watching people move through the new exhibit she titled Resilience. It wasn't about Sterling. It wasn't about what happened to her. It was about what came after. Each piece told a story, some painted, some sculpted, some spoken aloud through short poems playing on loop in the background. Every wall held a theme: strength, clarity, rebuilding, truth. Near the center of the room was Ebony's own work, a canvas filled edge to edge with layered texture, lines crossing, clashing, but never collapsing. The placard beneath it read, "You can hurt me. You cannot erase me." People stood in front of it quietly, some for minutes at a time. Jade walked up with 2 glasses of ginger tea. "You did it," she said, handing one over. Ebony smiled, tired but full. "I didn't want revenge," she replied. "I wanted my voice back." "You never lost it," Jade said. "You just stopped sharing it with the wrong people." The opening night of Resilience raised enough to fund 3 scholarships for black art students in Houston. Nora and Marcus came early, left late, beaming with the kind of pride that needs no words. Before she locked up that night, Ebony took one final walk through the space alone. She stood in front of her piece and whispered, "You're still standing." That was the point. Sterling heard about the gallery from a small newspaper clipping. It arrived tucked inside a letter from a former co-worker who hadn't written before and wouldn't write again. The page was folded neatly. On it, a photo of Ebony standing in front of her exhibit. The headline read, "Survivor turned curator launches healing exhibit for the city." Sterling sat on the lower bunk of his cell, the clipping in one hand. His cellmate glanced over. "That your girl?" Sterling didn't answer. He read the article twice. There were no mentions of him, no allusions, no shadowy references. Just her, Her voice, her strength, her message. He folded the clipping once, then again, then again. He didn't tear it. He didn't speak. He just stared. The guards moved past the cell. Lights dimmed. The noise of the hallway faded. Sterling leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the folded paper still pressed between his fingers. There were no appeals pending, no one visiting, no reporters calling. Outside those walls, life had moved forward, and the woman he tried to erase was now the one being remembered. It was quiet at Discovery Green. Ebony sat on a bench near the children's play area, legs crossed, sipping iced tea. The sun was out, warm but not harsh. Families passed. Kids ran. Music drifted in from a street performer. She looked out across the park, not searching for anything, just watching. A young girl tripped near the fountain and burst into tears. Her mother scooped her up, whispering something calming. The girl nodded slowly, wiping her face. Ebony smiled. That used to be her, learning how to hold on without letting things break her. She pulled out a sketch pad from her tote. Not to draw, just to feel the weight of it again. Her phone buzzed. A message from the gallery assistant. The mural team wants to know if you'll approve the final sketch today. Ebony typed back, "Tell them I'll be there after lunch." She looked up again. Life hadn't returned to normal. It had moved into something better, clearer, louder where it mattered, quiet where it needed to be. She wasn't waiting for closure anymore. She was living the continuation. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who needs to be reminded. You can be hurt and still rebuild. You can be betrayed and still trust again. And sometimes the people who try to bury you only plant you. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below. Still standing. Because so is she.